She had always been the pack's shadow, the mute Omega, the girl whose voice had vanished a decade ago. But silence never made her blind. Out in the frozen vastness of the sawtooth wilderness, Riven saw the kind of betrayal others refused to notice. She spotted the tracks that proved her beta had sold them out. With fingers numb and trembling, she carved a warning into the snow, a silent, frantic plea. But the moment had already slipped away. As the first streak of sunrise crested the ridge, it wasn't her pack who found her. It was the enemy. And at dawn's edge, the Frostborn pack. 30 white wolves closed in on her. The cold felt like a living force. It pressed hard against the thin fabric of Riven's tunic, a merciless reminder of where she stood in the hierarchy. Omegas carried the cold deeper than anyone. They repaired the pack house while the others warmed themselves by the fire. They split the wood while the stronger wolves claimed the best cuts of meat. And Riven, unable to speak a word, lived at the very bottom. Her world was the brutal sweep of the Sawtooth National Forest in central Idaho, a land of jagged peaks and dense pine valleys. Her home, the Bloodridge pack, guarded the territory around the mountain of the same name. And that morning, the cold felt harsher than usual, sharp, breathless frost clinging to every pine needle. Riven stood along the northern border, her breath fogging the air, her fingers raw as she gathered brittle branches. She was supposed to be collecting tinder, but she lingered, drawn once again toward the ridge overlooking the valley. A dangerous habit. Omegas didn't patrol, but Riven watched. While others depended on scent or brute strength, she relied on her eyes. She noticed how hawks circled when prey hid below. She read the faint shifts in snowdrifts that warned of oncoming storms, and for the past week she'd seen tracks that stirred something primal and cold in her chest. Prints too lean, too precise, too numerous to belong to her own pack. She crested the ridge, sweeping her gaze across the valley floor, then froze. The bundle of sticks slipped soundlessly from her hands. Down by the frozen creek, the old map's Salmon River, stood a clearing. And in that clearing stood two figures, one massive and broad-shouldered, draped in the signature white pelts of the Winterfang clan. Even from this distance she recognized the sharp, icy scent of Malric frost. But it was the man speaking to him who turned her blood to ice slush. He belonged to her pack. She recognized the posture, the smug tilt of his head, the dark fur of his wolf pelt draped over his shoulders. Draven Cade Beta of Bloodridge, Kael Voss's second in command. His brother in everything but blood. Hidden behind a granite boulder, Riven watched Draven hand Malric a rolled parchment, a map. She didn't need to get closer. She knew exactly what it was. Bloodridge defenses, cave vulnerabilities, patrol patterns, the dens where pups and elders slept. This wasn't a meeting. It was treason. Malric laughed. A sound carried more in expression than in volume, but Riven saw the wicked curve of it. He clapped Draven on the shoulder before turning north with supernatural speed. Draven jogged back toward the pack house, toward home, toward his Alpha. Riven's silent mind screamed. She had to warn them. She had to warn Kael. She stumbled back from the ridge, sliding down the icy slope. She couldn't run straight to the pack house. Draven would see her. He would catch her. He was a beta. She was an omega. He could snap her neck and claim a rogue was to blame. She needed to leave a message. Here. Now. She dashed into a small clearing of untouched snow. Her hands shook so violently she could barely form shapes. Think, Riven, think. Dropping to her knees, she clawed into the snow with raw, burning fingertips. There was no time for precision. It just had to be clear. First she drew the sigil of the Winterfang clan, a triangle marked by 3 vertical claw lines. Beside it, she etched the Bloodridge symbol, a simple peaked mountain. Then she dragged a line between the two, and at its center she drew a 2-headed wolf. Betrayal. Treason. It wasn't enough. Kael might not understand. She pressed her frozen palms to her face. He had to know who. She stabbed her finger into the snow beneath the two-headed wolf and carved Marcus. But she caught herself. No. She scratched it out and rewrote it with truth, Draven. She leaned back, gasping, chest heaving. The warning was complete. A clear warning. A silent accusation. She had to vanish and loop back toward the pack house from the southern trail. She needed to look like she'd only been gathering herbs. Pushing herself upright, her legs quivered beneath her. Then a low, velvety growl cut through the air and froze her in place. It slipped out from the trees on her left. Another answered from the right. Behind her, a brittle twig snapped. Riven turned in a slow, horrified circle. Dawn was barely brushing over the peaks, washing the world in a cold, muted, gray-blue glow. And in that thin morning light she saw them. Eyes. Dozens. Predatory. Yellow. Icy. One by one, massive bodies stepped out from between the pines. They were giants bigger than any wolf in the Bloodridge pack, and each one was cloaked in pure glacial white. Pelts bred for deep ice winters. Winterfang clan. They hadn't all left with Malric Frost. This was a setup. A hidden squad had remained behind. 10, 20, 30. The Frostborn pack formed a perfect silent ring around her. Riven stood alone in the center beside her, frantic message carved into the snow, and she understood she wasn't meant to walk away from this. Alpha Malric Frost stepped out from the pale circle, his shift melting away with arrogant ease. He was tall, almost spectral, with hair nearly as white as the wolves around him, and eyes that looked carved from frozen water. He gazed down at the snow, a cruel, slow smile stretching across his face. "Well now, what do we have here?" His voice was smooth, polished, glinting with mockery. He crouched, tracing the two-headed wolf she'd drawn with a gloved fingertip. "Draven, a traitor. And your little mouse managed to figure it out." Riven's heart slammed against her ribs, threatening to break out of her chest. She could smell them, their sharp alien coldness sinking into her lungs. They were hunters, and she was prey. "A shame," Malric murmured as he rose. "My new ally will be so disappointed to hear his scent was left behind." Pine leather and the familiar musk of her own pack drifted in. "Malric!" The voice thundered from behind her, deep, commanding. Riven's head whipped around. Kael Voss, Alpha of Bloodridge, stood at the edge of the clearing, 4 of his strongest warriors flanking him. He was half-shifted, gold eyes, burning canines lengthened. He was every inch Alder Voss's son, broad, powerful, his dark hair wild as a storm, his face cut from the same stone as the mountain that housed their pack. His gaze flicked from Malric to Riven, confusion sharpening into anger and suspicion. An omega miles from the pack house, surrounded by 30 enemy wolves and still alive. Kael, Malric greeted, arms spreading wide. "Just having a friendly chat with your messenger." "She is no messenger of mine," Kael growled, his hand gripping the hilt of the long hunting knife at his hip. "Let her go." "Oh, I don't think so." Malric's smirk sharpened. "We caught her at your border scratching something into the snow. Looked like she wanted to warn us about your patrols." Riven's eyes flew wide. "No!" She shook her head hard, jabbing her finger toward the drawing. "Read it. Read it." Kael's gaze dropped. He saw the sigils. He saw the name. Riven watched the exact instant his eyes narrowed. Draven. A flicker of shock cut across Kael's face. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, voice low and dangerous, and then someone crashed through the trees. Alpha Y came as fast as I could. Draven Cade burst into the clearing, panting, eyes wide with feigned terror. He stopped short, taking in Malric, the Frostborn wolves, Kael, and Riven. She's here," he gasped, pointing at her. Malric's smirk stretched. "Ah, speak of the devil," Riven Kael said, a voice flat and hard, though his eyes were locked on Draven. "Draven, explain." Draven looked between them. He saw the drawing. He saw his own name. Riven watched his mind sharpen panic calculation and then cold decision. Alpha. I didn't know how to tell you. Draven began, voice thick with manufactured grief. I've suspected her for weeks. I've been tracking her. Riven's blood turned to ice. What do you mean you were tracking her? Kael Voss repeated, his voice low and dangerous. She's been slipping out. Meeting someone at the border, Draven Cade said, letting his tone fall into a somber whisper. He looked at Riven with a wounded expression, one far more frightening than any snarl. I thought she was just lonely. He paused, letting the moment breathe. But then I caught a scent. Winterfang. Lies. The word screamed inside Riven's skull, but her throat gave her nothing in return. She shook her head violently, her hands curling into fists. She's been feeding them intel. Draven pressed on, his voice rising with righteous fury. She's why their patrols keep slipping so close. She's why we lost 3 scouts last month, and now... He gestured wildly. Now she draws this. He strode toward the carving in the snow. With a vicious kick, he wiped out his own name. She's trying to pin her treason on me. Kael's jaw clenched. And this meeting, he demanded, motioning toward Malric Frost. What are you doing here, Draven? I followed her. Draven shouted. I knew she'd be meeting her contact today. I was coming to expose her. I didn't realize. He drew a sharp breath. I didn't know it was Malric Frost himself. It was a flawless, venomous lie. One that closed every door around her. Kael looked at Riven. His face was carved into stone, utterly unreadable. He was an alpha. He had to judge fairly, even when fairness tore him apart. It was the word of his beta. His childhood brother against the frantic, voiceless pleas of an Omega dragged into an enemy circle. What do you have to say for yourself? Riven Kael asked, even knowing she could not answer. Riven felt the world tilt beneath her. She stared at him, begging with her eyes. He's lying. You know me. I'm not this. Look. Draven lunged, not toward her, but to the log half buried in snow where she dropped her firewood. He dug through the powder and lifted something triumphantly. A carved wolf. White quartz. Winterfang's sigil. A payment. She dropped this when you arrived. Draven roared. Riven froze. She had never seen the thing in her life. He'd planted it. He must have carried it for this exact moment. That was the final blow. Kael's expression hardened, all doubt draining away, replaced by the cold, merciless certainty of an alpha betrayed. Malric Kael growled, "This is Bloodridge business. Hand her over." Malric Frost, watching the scene like a spectator at a stage play, lifted one shoulder in a lazy shrug. By all means. A compromised spy is useless to us. He flicked his hand. 2 frostborn wolves shoved Riven forward. She stumbled and collapsed at Kael's feet. She looked up at him, her entire soul screaming for him to see the truth. Kael looked down at her, his golden eyes as cold as Malric's frostbitten stare. Seize her, he commanded. Take her to the cells. She would be tried for treason at sundown. 2 warriors wolves she had known her whole life grabbed her by the arms. Their grips were rough bruising. As they dragged her away, Riven forced herself to look back. Draven stood at Kael's side, one hand resting comfortingly on his alpha's shoulder, his expression painted with loyalty. But over Kael's shoulder, Draven's gaze met hers. He smiled. The cells of Bloodridge were never meant for comfort. They were small, dry caverns, hollowed deep into the mountain, sealed with iron-banded oak, built for rogues, captured enemies, or now supposed traitors. They threw Riven inside. She hit the cold stone hard, losing her breath. The door slammed. The heavy bar dropped. Darkness swallowed her whole. Only a thin sliver of light leaked under the door. The muffled roar of the pack outside, already calling for her execution, echoed down the stone hall. Riven crawled to the farthest wall and curled in on herself, shaking. It wasn't the cold that broke her. It was the injustice. the terrifying helplessness of having no voice. Her voice had been stolen 10 years ago when rogues slaughtered her parents. She'd been found days later beneath the cabin floorboards, silent as a ghost. She hadn't spoken since. Now that silence would kill her. Hours passed. The light beneath the door dimmed, shifting as the sun moved, then brightened again with the flicker of torchlight. The bar scraped. The door began to open. Riven pressed herself tightly against the rock wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free. The door creaked open, and Alpha Kael Voss filled the frame, his figure carved in shadow by the torchlight behind him. He stepped inside alone and let the heavy door swing shut. He didn't bother lighting the torch mounted in her cell. Darkness clung to them like a second skin. "The pack is calling for your execution," he said, his voice not the thunder of an alpha, but a worn, hollow rasp. "Draven's testimony is convincing. The token he claimed to find, your presence out there. Everything points to you." Riven lurched upright. She stepped into the faint spill of hallway light, shaking her head, hands clasped tight before her, as though begging the moon itself. "I want to know why," Kael said, his voice cracking into a harsh growl. "My father took you in. Bloodridge sheltered you when you had no one. I defended you. When others called you useless, a burden, I told them you belonged here." He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her small frame. "Was it all a lie, Riven? Are you a spy?" She met his gaze wide, panicked, desperate. She could smell pine on him. And rage. But beneath both there was something softer. Doubt. He hadn't come here to condemn her. He was searching for a reason not to. She had no voice, but she was not powerless. Her eyes darted across the cell. There. A brittle piece of charcoal fallen from an old torch. She scrambled for it, her fingers curling around the charred stick. Kael watched bewildered as she moved to the one flat patch of stone floor. She knelt. Her hand trembled, but she forced it steady. With quick, frantic strokes, she drew. She sketched Kael broad-shouldered, strong. Behind him, she etched the mountain of Bloodridge. Then she drew Draven, standing behind Kael. A knife angled toward the Alpha's back. Kael inhaled sharply, as though the drawing had struck him in the chest. "You're accusing my beta of trying to kill me." Riven shook her head. "Not only that." She drew again, hands shaking. She drew Draven clasping hands with a tall, pale figure. Above them, she marked the sigil of the Winterfang clan. "You still stand by your story?" Kael whispered, voice dangerously soft. "You're claiming Draven betrayed us. That he met with Malric Frost." Riven nodded, tears gathering in her lashes. She pointed at the drawing, then at herself, then slammed her fist against her chest. "I saw it. I swear it." Kael turned away, fingers dragging through his hair. "A drawing," he muttered. "He's my beta, Riven. We grew up together. His word against charcoal on a floor. It's not enough." He looked back at her expression carved in stone. "I can't stop the trial, but I will. I will listen." He left. The door slammed. The bar locked into place. Riven was alone again, her desperate attempt collapsing into darkness. An hour later, the bar scraped. Riven stiffened. "Kael." But it wasn't the Alpha. It was Sarah. Sarah, the lead hunter's daughter. The stunning, razor-edged wolf who had spent years angling to become Kael's chosen mate. She despised Riven, hated the gentle way Kael sometimes looked at the mute Omega, soft in a way he never looked at her. Well, Sarah purred, leaning against the doorframe. The lantern in her hand threw slick, shifting shadows across the stone. "Looks like your quiet little act is finally over." Riven stared back, emotionless. "Did you really think Kael would ever want you?" Sarah stalked into the cell, her hips swaying with cruel confidence. "You're broken, mute, useless. He kept you around out of pity. But now, her smile sharpened. Now he sees you for the snake you truly are. Sarah crouched in front of Riven, her grin cutting like a blade. I'll be at the execution, she said softly. I hope it's slow. When you're gone, Kael will finally see me. He'll need a strong Luna to help him heal from this betrayal. She lifted her chin proudly, and I'll be right there to comfort him. Riven held her gaze unblinking, refusing to give Sarah even the smallest taste of fear. Sarah's smug smile cracked when she saw no fear in Riven's eyes. With a sharp exhale, she stood, irritation tightening her movements. Enjoy the cold traitor, she spat, turning on her heel. But as she turned, the lantern light flared across the stone floor and Riven's eyes caught something. Her breath hitched. The boots. Sarah's polished leather boots were caked in mud, not the deep, dark soil of Bloodridge's inner territory, but a strange pale gray, speckled with glints of mica. Riven's mind locked onto it. She knew that mud. She'd seen it that very morning. It came from only one place, the icy banks of the northern river where the salmon carved through the wild borderlands. The exact place she'd seen Draven Cade and Malric Frost. The same place she'd been captured. Sarai, the pampered wolf, who flinched at dirt, who loathed getting her claws chipped, had no reason to be anywhere near the border. She hated the wilds. She never joined patrols. So why had she been there? A new bone-deep dread bloomed in Riven's chest. Was she part of it too? As the door slammed shut, cutting off the lantern light, Riven stared into the darkness. Her breath shallow. Her thoughts spiraling. It wasn't just Draven. This ran deeper. And she was the only one who knew. Kael Voss didn't return to the great hall where the rest of the pack waited, blades sharpened and eyes burning for blood. He went to his quarters alone. The drawing Riven had scratched into the stone clung to his mind like a brand. A knife at his back. He paced like a caged animal, the wolf beneath his skin clawing to break free. It would be so easy to dismiss her, to call it the act of a desperate, cornered girl. But Riven had never lied, never played games. She was quiet, scarred, awkward, but never manipulative. If anything, she was too honest. She didn't have the cunning for conspiracy. But Draven... Kael had trusted him his whole life. But trust wasn't blindness. He knew Draven's ambition. He knew how his beta viewed him. Too soft, too much like Alder Voss, who had preached peace, while the world sharpened its fangs. The word of my beta against charcoal on a cell floor. But those weren't the eyes of a liar. Riven had looked at him with terror, not guilt. Kael made his choice. He was Alpha. And the Alpha served truth, no matter how much it burned. He found Rowan, the oldest warrior, on his guard, gray around the muzzle, once loyal to Alder himself. Rowan, Kael said in a low growl, "You say nothing of this. To anyone." Rowan gave a curt nod. "Understood. I want you watching Draven, every breath he takes, every move he makes. He gets no hint. Report only to me." Rowan's brow furrowed in concern, but nodded once more. "Alpha." "And one more thing," Kael added, his voice colder. "Find Sarah. Tell her I need to speak with her about the trial. Bring her to my chambers, not the hall." As Rowan vanished into the corridors, Kael moved. His bones cracked as he shifted his form, collapsing to all fours. Thick black fur exploded across his body. Moments later, a massive obsidian wolf burst from the keep, tearing through the forest like shadow incarnate. He didn't follow the trails. He didn't need to. The land knew him. And he knew where he had to go, the northern ridge. He reached the clearing in under an hour. The frostborn wolves were long gone, but their stench clung to his territory like ice rot. Kael snarled, padding through the blood-stained snow. Riven's warning was still there, faint, half erased, but visible. The twin sigils. The two-headed wolf. He bypassed it and moved toward the river. The air still reeked of betrayal. He inhaled deep. Malric Frost and Draven. Their scents twisted together like rope. They'd stood here together. Her drawing hadn't lied. Then he caught something else subtle, hidden. Faint perfume on the wind. He tracked it weaving through the trees to a thick patch of juniper 50 yards from the clearing. There. The sweet floral soap favored by the elite she-wolves. Sarah. She'd been here, watching, hiding. Kael's heart thundered. His gaze dropped to the frozen bank. Embedded in the mud were 2 sets of tracks, one heavy-booted and wide Draven. The other smaller, lighter heels designed for beauty, not battle. Sarah. The same silverleaf mud Riven had noticed. Kael threw his head back and howled. It was a sound torn from rage and revelation. Then he ran, back to Bloodridge, back to judgment. He shifted mid-stride, the wolf falling away as he stormed into his chambers, human again, breath-ragged fury burning behind his eyes. Roan was already waiting, and Sarah stood beside him, visibly uneasy, nervously curling a strand of her hair around her finger. "Alpha," she purred, forcing a flirty smile. "Roan said you wanted to see me. About the trial. Honestly, I agree. Hanging's far too merciful." Kael's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Where were you this morning, Sarah?" She froze. The fake sweetness in her expression faltered. I was at the weaving den," she said quickly, "with the other women mending winter blankets." Kael didn't even blink. "Roan," he said without taking his eyes off her. "Go to the weaving den. Ask Mara and the others if Sarah was there at dawn." Roan nodded and disappeared silently. And with that, Sarah's polished facade fell apart. "Alpha, wait, I mean. I got there later. You're still wearing the same boots." Kael's tone dropped to something low and lethal. Sarah looked down. Her boots, untouched since morning, were still thick with pale silver-gray mud, glinting with mica. Her face drained of color. "That mud only exists in one place," Kael said, stepping closer. "The northern riverbank. The exact place where Draven met Malric. The exact spot where Riven was taken." I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, backing away. "You were there." Kael bellowed, his alpha power roaring through the chamber. Sarah dropped to her knees, trembling under the crushing weight of his command. "You were hiding in the junipers. I caught your scent. I saw your tracks." Tears broke loose from her eyes, streaming down her cheeks. "I followed him," she sobbed. "I followed Draven." Kael stared down at her, fists clenched. "Why? I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought he was meeting some lover from another pack. I was going to catch him, use it to pressure him, to get him to convince you to choose me as your mate." "And what did you see?" Kael dropped to a knee, gripping her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I saw him," she choked out. "I saw that white monster Malric. I watched Draven hand him a map. They talked about attacking. Draven said he'd open the gates, let the Frostborn in." She broke into sobs again. "I panicked. I ran back. I didn't know what to do." "And Riven?" Kael asked, voice barely a whisper. "I didn't even see her," Sarah whimpered. "Not until they dragged her in. And when Draven accused her, I felt relieved." She looked up at him, guilt etched deep into her face. "It meant no one would look at me. I thought I'd be safe. I was scared, Alpha. I swear it." And yet Kael shoved her away, disgust curling in his throat. He stood, heart pounding. Riven had been innocent. She'd told the truth in silence, in drawings, in desperate eyes. She had risked everything to warn them, and he had thrown her in chains. My beta, my brother. He betrayed everything. "Roan," Kael roared. The old warrior stepped through the doorway, sharp-eyed and silent. "Alpha. Summon the council. Every elder, every hunter." Kael's voice was pure steel. And bring Draven. Roan hesitated. For the trial. Yes. Kael said, his golden eyes blazing like sunlit ice. He thinks he's attending an execution. Kael's voice darkened. But he's walking into his own. The great hall of Bloodridge was carved from the mountain itself, massive and echoing warm with firelight that danced across stone walls. Smoke from the central fire pit curled to the ceiling. The pack's elite were gathered somber, grim, tight-lipped. At the front, seated atop the dais, the elders waited in silence. Kael stood before them, unreadable. Draven Cade stood at his side, arms crossed, wearing a mask of solemn duty. Bring in the prisoner, Kael ordered. The doors creaked open. 2 guards marched Riven into the hall. She walked stiffly, her tunic torn, her skin pale, but her head held high. Hisses and low growls echoed around her as the pack glared. Riven ignored them. She locked eyes with Kael. His expression didn't change, but for the briefest second she saw it, a flicker of torment. Guilt. The trial of Riven Omega of Bloodridge begins, announced Mara, the oldest among them. She stands accused of treason. Beta Draven, present your case. Draven stepped forward, calm, confident, his voice steady. He repeated the lie with flawless, practiced ease. Draven Cade's voice rang through the stone chamber like a hammer striking steel. She's a traitor, he declared, placing the white quartz wolf token on the council table with a deliberate finality. She put our young, our elders, all of us in danger. A chilling chant echoed back from the gathered pack. Death. Riven stood motionless, shoulders squared, her silence cutting deeper than any cry for mercy. Kael Voss raised his voice, smooth as a blade, sliding from its sheath. A compelling tale, Draven. The room stilled. And what of Sarah? She was there as well. Sarah hesitated at the back of the hall, her complexion as pale as the stone walls. Draven's head jerked toward her, surprise and unease flashing across his features. Her steps were slow, faltering as she avoided his gaze and moved to the front. Tell the pack what you witnessed near the northern border this morning, Kael commanded. Alpha, she wasn't. Draven began, but Kael cut him off like a whip cracking through the air. Silence, Beta. Let her speak. Sarah's eyes darted between Kael of the crowd and Draven, whose stare now burned with silent threat. Her hands trembled. I was there, she whispered, barely audible over the rising tension. A gasp rippled through the hall. I saw him, Draven. He met with Malric Frost. The room erupted in chaos. Draven's face contorted with fury. Lies, he roared. She and the Omega. This is a setup. Kael lifted a folded parchment from his tunic and unfolded it before the elders. She spoke of a map, this one, a copy of our western cave defenses. She said you handed it to Malric Frost. Draven stared at the parchment at Kael, and in that moment, the facade shattered. His posture shifted, shoulders rolling back, jaw tightening, arrogance sliding into place like a second skin. So he sneered, the silent shadow and the pampered snake. What a pair. The room fell into stunned stillness. It was as if time itself held its breath. Why, Kael asked, voice cracking with raw betrayal. We were family Draven. Family Draven laughed, bitter and sharp. I was your shadow, your father's shadow. That old fool loved peace. You inherited his weakness. He jabbed a finger toward Kael. Malric knows what real power looks like. When he claims this land, he'll wipe away the rot. He promised me this valley, and I will rule it under him. Elder Mara gasped. You would sell your own blood, I'm saving it, Draven roared. By cutting out the infection, starting with him, in a heartbeat, he drew a blade from his boot and lunged not at the elders, but at Riven. He moved like lightning, faster than anyone could intercept. The guards were too slow, Kael too far. But someone moved. Sarah, trembling wide-eyed, hurled herself between Draven and Riven. The knife plunged deep into her shoulder. She let out a ragged, shocked cry and crumpled. Draven raised the bloodied blade again, But that moment was all Kael needed. With a deafening roar that echoed through the cavern like thunder, Kael shifted fully. His human form vanished in a surge of dark fur and monstrous power. He vaulted across the dais, a blur of rage and vengeance, and smashed into Draven with the force of a landslide. Draven's body hurtled across the hall, slamming into the far wall. He shifted mid-air, landing in a twisted half-wolf form, snarling stunned. Kael, now a massive black wolf, eyes burning with fury, stood protectively over Sarah, and riven muscles, coiled breath steaming. The hall held its breath. The Alpha had chosen his side, and war was coming. Kael's snarl deepened as his eyes locked on Draven. But before another word could be spoken, a piercing horn blast cut through the hall, sharp, urgent, unmistakable. The alarm for a full-scale assault. Roan barreled through the doors, pale and breathless. "Alpha," he shouted. "Northern Ridge, it's the Winterfang clan. Dozens of them. They're here, all of them." On the blood-slick floor, Draven coughed blood and laughed, a twisted grin on his face. "Idiots," he rasped. "You really thought this trial was the real plan? It was just the curtain. He never needed a signal. He was waiting for you, all to be packed in like sheep." Kael's gaze snapped toward the grand entrance. The war had begun. Chaos detonated inside the great hall. Warriors scrambled for weapons, armor clanking in their haste. Healers swarmed around Sarah's bleeding body. Elders yelled over the roar, ushering civilians toward the hidden tunnels. Kael, now back in his human form, yanked on his leather and steel battle mantle. Rowan archers to the high ridge, Mara locked down the nursery. He spun Draven. But the traitor was gone. In the chaos, he'd shifted his dark gray wolf form, vanishing into the storm of bodies. No, Kael bellowed. A traitor loose during an invasion could slaughter them from within. Alpha Rowan shouted again. "They're not just at the ridge, they're in the western tunnels." Kael's blood chilled. The same tunnels, marked on the stolen map, the ones Draven betrayed. Riven, still stunned, was yanked by a guard. "Go get to the nursery." But her eyes burned with realization. She knew those tunnels, twisting narrow, laced with ancient vents only Omegas ever crawled through, places warriors never bothered with. But she remembered something they didn't. Those vents didn't just bring air in. They let fire out. From the hall's edge, Riven broke free, ripped a torch from the wall, and bolted toward the west. Riven, Kael shouted, "Stop, come back!" But she was already gone, a shadow racing into the same tunnels, now swarming with Frostborn. The battle outside was vicious. Bloodridge wolves fought with feral desperation, defending their home with teeth and claw. But the Winterfang invaders were trained, merciless and silent. At their front, Malrek Frost, a ghost in white fur, his blade slicing through defenders like paper. In the heart of the great hall, Kael met him. Alpha versus Alpha. The room shook under the force of their clash, claws, steel bone. Kael fought with wildfire fury, but Malrek moved with calm cruelty, parrying and striking like the cold incarnate. Meanwhile, Riven ran. Torch clutched tight, breath ragged. She scrambled through black stone and frost-choked air. Behind her, she heard them paws pounding, wolves flooding toward the hall. If she didn't stop them, the pack was doomed. She reached a spot she knew by touch. A narrow choke point supported by brittle, pitch-soaked beams. Above it, a narrow vent to the surface. One spark, one flame, and this place would become a tomb. Without hesitation, she thrust the torch into the driest beam. Flames exploded to life, greedy and bright. Wolves feared many things but fire. Fire was universal. The blaze leapt skyward, roaring up the chimney, devouring timber, sucking oxygen from the passage. Panic howls erupted behind her. The white wolves turned to flee. But it was too late. The fire spread like fury itself. The tunnel became an oven. Riven stumbled back, choking eyes stinging. The ceiling groaned, then cracked. A rumble deeper than thunder. Then collapse. In the great hall, the western mouth went silent. Kael, locked in combat, paused just long enough to hear it. The distant roar, the sudden silence behind him, then the smoke and realization. Riven had buried half the enemy alive. Malric saw it too, his icy composure shattered. "You," he snarled, realizing reinforcements would never come. Kael struck. His fangs sank deep into Malric's shoulder, wrenching the pale Alpha down onto the stone. Malric screamed a sound not of anger, but raw pain. Victory was close, and it had started with a single spark. Riven's spark. Marcus emerged like a shadow from the ruins, silent, deadly, waiting for his moment to strike. Seeing his master, Malric Frost brought low. The traitor sprang from the darkness behind Kael Voss, his gray wolf form slicing through the chaos like a blade. Kael was still locked in brutal combat with Malric. He didn't see it coming. He had no time to react. Draven Cade's sword through the air, claws extended, aimed straight for Kael's throat. It should have been the killing blow. But Riven had just stumbled back into the great hall, blackened with soot lungs, burning raw from smoke. And in that split second she saw it all. Kael vulnerable, Marcus airborne, death seconds away. Her mind cracked wide open. All the pain, the decade of silence, the trauma that had imprisoned her voice for 10 long years, shattered. Something broke loose inside her, and she screamed. Not a name, not a word, just a sound, guttural, wild, full of primal fury and terror. "No!" It ripped through the air like a hurricane of anguish. It wasn't human. It was the voice of every year she'd been silenced, every injustice. It shook the rafters and froze every living creature in place. Every wolf, Frostborn and Bloodridge alike, stopped mid-battle. Marcus, just feet from his strike, faltered. That split second was all Kael needed. He felt the shift behind him. Released Malric and spun, claws flashing, meeting Marcus mid-air. With a roar that could split the mountain, Kael caught Marcus by the throat and slammed him into the stone floor. Malric, bleeding and defeated, scrambled up. He looked around. The tide had turned. His forces were scattered, being overrun. Marcus was pinned beneath Kael's wrath. Malric's ice-blue eyes flashed once more with rage, and then he ran, like the coward he was. He and a dozen surviving Frostborn wolves fled the hall, vanishing into the wild. Silence fell. A heavy, unreal silence. The clash of battle was replaced by the groans of the injured and the distant hiss of dying flames. The war was over. The reckoning had begun. Kael, still in full shift, knelt on Marcus's chest. Claws bared, his breathing ragged. He turned his head. Across the ruined hall, Riven stood, trembling. Her body shook so violently, she looked as if she might collapse. Her hand clutched her throat. Soot streaked her skin. Tears carved lines down her cheeks. The mute Omega had spoken. No one moved. No one breathed. Kael rose slowly. His claws still blood-stained, his chest still heaving. At his feet, Marcus shifted back, broken, defeated, but alive. His human eyes burned with poisonous hate. The glacial fang wolves who remained were being shackled, their so-called Alpha having abandoned them. Kael reached down, yanked Draven to his feet like a doll. "Roan," he growled, "bind him. Take him to the deep cells. 4 guards, no food, no water. He speaks to no one, not until I decide what comes next." "Yes, Alpha," Roan replied, voice steel hard. He dragged Marcus away. But as Draven passed Riven, their eyes met. No remorse, only a vow of vengeance. Then Kael turned. His people made way, a path opening before him. Bloodied warriors, frightened elders, shaken healers, they all looked on. And there on the far side of the silence was Riven. She looked like she'd lived through hell because she had. Torn clothes, bruised throat skin, gray with ash. But she stood. She stood. Kael moved to her, each footstep deliberate. He could feel the weight of every gaze in the hall. This moment would echo for generations. This wasn't just a broken girl. This was salvation. He stopped just in front of her, her eyes wide and afraid, locked on his. She looked like a child expecting to be punished for breaking something sacred. Her voice, newborn and raw, had cost her. Her face was pale, her throat bruised from the scream that had shattered worlds. Riven, Kael whispered, not as an alpha, but as a man who had just been saved. Her eyes clenched shut. A tear, clean and shining, traced down her cheek. She tried to speak, just a whisper, just a breath, but all that came was a dry rasp. She was petrified. Her silence had always been her cage, but also her armor. Now she'd shattered it, and what waited beyond that silence was terrifying. "It's okay," Kael Voss murmured, taking a careful step closer. His battle-worn hand, streaked with blood, moved with a gentleness that defied the storm he'd just weathered. He cupped Riven's cheek thumb, brushing away the tear trailing down her face. "Try," he whispered, barely audible. "Say my name." She swallowed hard, the motion scraping like sandpaper. Her focus locked on his gaze, gold-flecked, steady, the only light she'd ever known in the dark. She drew in a breath that shook her ribs. "Kael." The name emerged like wind through rusted metal, cracked raw, barely above a whisper. But to Kael it was everything. His eyes stung as emotion broke through his hardened shell. He stepped in, pulling Riven to him, holding her tight against his leather-wrapped chest. His face buried in her smoky hair, his arms trembled with the weight of grief, betrayal, and overwhelming relief. "You saved me," he breathed only for her. "You saved us all. Your voice, Riven. Your voice saved us." She clung to him, her small hands grasping his armor, and for the first time in years she cried. It wasn't quiet or hidden, it was human. It was real. The spell broke only when Mara stepped forward, her aged face carved with guilt. She stopped in front of them. Kael didn't release Riven. They stood together, a single, unshakable force. Child Mara began, her voice trembling. "We ignored your warning in the snow. We saw only what we wanted to see, a mute Omega. A burden. Blind as we were, you, the silent one, were the only one with sight." Her gaze dropped, shame bending her shoulders. "We nearly killed our own savior. For 50 winters I've led the Council of Bloodridge. And I've never been so wrong." Then she straightened and did the unthinkable. She bowed, deeply, formally, hands clasped. "On behalf of this pack, Riven, I am sorry. And I thank you." One by one the warriors, hunters, elders, even the weavers, followed suit. A tide of reverence swept the great hall. The mute Omega was no more. In her place stood something new, someone powerful. The next morning, Draven Cade was dragged into the hall. No blood, now, but the scent of fire and ruin lingered. The pack watched in somber silence. Kael stood tall on the dais, Riven at his side. She wore clean clothes, said nothing, but her presence was undeniable. Draven Cade Kael's voice rang out like thunder. "You've been found guilty of high treason. You conspired with our enemy. You sought to destroy your own. You tried to kill your Alpha. And you framed the innocent." Chained between two guards, Draven sneered. "Just finish it, Voss. Be the killer you claim to despise." Kael's voice lowered to a dangerous hush. "Death is a gift, Draven. It ends the suffering. That is not your fate. For a wolf, the only true death is to be without a pack." He lifted his hand. "You are hereby exiled. Your name, your rank, your wolf, all stripped. You will carry the mark of betrayal. You will walk alone." The pack gasped. Roan stepped forward with the iron brand glowing red from the fire pit. Kael took it in his hand. This marketh, he declared, will tell the world that you are no Alpha, no brother, no one. With no hesitation, Kael pressed the iron to Draven's face. The sear, the scent of burning flesh, and the scream, raw and broken, seared into every mind present. "You're weak!" Draven shrieked, pain cracking his pride. "She made you weak. You'll all rot in this cursed valley." Kael turned his back. "Take him to the border," he ordered, "and leave him there." The snows would melt. The tunnels were sealed forever. And the name Draven Cade would never be spoken again. Sarah healed in time, and the moment she was strong enough to leave the healer's den, she sought out Riven. Her apology came in broken words wet with tears and regret. Riven simply nodded, silent but not cold. Forgiveness, though quiet, was given. The Bloodridge pack had enough enemies beyond their borders. They didn't need to keep making them inside. Riven's voice was fragile at first, like a fawn taking its first wobbly steps. She spoke in whispers and only to Kael Voss. He would spend hours with her, not in the echoing great hall but in the sanctuary of his own chambers, patiently drawing out her words. "What did you see today?" he'd ask gently. "A hawk," she'd whisper. "It took my rabbit." "And what else, Mara?" she'd say, eyes narrowing just a bit. "She cheats at stones." That made Kael smile. Small, soft, real. As the bruises in her throat faded, her words flowed easier. 10 years of silence unraveled into wit, sharp observations, and quiet humor. She hadn't just been watching, she'd been learning. Riven didn't just see everything. She understood it. And Kael was caught spellbound, night after night, not only by the woman who had once saved his life, but by her brilliant, beautiful mind. He was already hers, and he hadn't even realized it. Then spring arrived, green creeping in through thawed earth. They stood on a windswept ridge where months before she'd been dragged as a prisoner. The snow had vanished. The valley was alive again. "It feels different," Riven said, her voice no longer hesitant, but melodic, confident. "Everything's changed." Kael turned toward her, her hand warm in his. "I was so scared," she confessed, eyes falling on the place where she'd once drawn desperate warnings into the frost. "I thought no one would ever hear me. I'm listening now," he said, quiet and sure. "And I'll keep listening for the rest of my life." He took her other hand, pulling her to face him. "That mark you left in the snow, that was a warning. But your voice, Riven, that was a battle cry. It shook this pack awake. It became our heartbeat." His palms found her cheeks, eyes burning gold into hers. "And you are the heart of your Alpha, Kael," she whispered, resting her hands against his chest. "They called you the mute Omega," he said. "But I'll call you my Lunar." Then he kissed her. Not a kiss born of panic or shy discovery, but one full of certainty. A kiss that said, "I choose you. I trust you. I stand beside you." It was the beginning of something new, a future built not on dominance, but resilience. The pack wasn't saved by its warriors. It was saved by the one they'd all ignored. The mute Omega was gone, and in her place stood Luna Riven, her voice no longer a whisper, but a force ready to lead. And that's where her true journey begins. That day the pack learned something deeper than strength. True power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it watches. It listens. It speaks only when the world needs it most. So what do you think of Riven's journey? Was Kael wise to believe in her, or was it a blind leap of faith? Drop your thoughts on Draven Cade's betrayal and that game-changing moment in the comments. If you love this tale of raw justice and rising from the shadows, smash that like button, share this with someone who loves a fierce underdog, and don't forget to subscribe. We've got more epic stories coming every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's next. Thanks for listening.